Some threads aren't made for casual browsing. They're written at 3:17 a.m. by hands that won't admit what they've seen. You're listening to Lermo Stories, and tonight we're digging through the posts people tried to bury. Keep listening. One of these stories could have been written by someone just like you.
I was one of 12 contractors brought in to process records at a county administrative annex outside Columbus. The building wasn't old, just aggressively plain. Drop ceiling, gray carpet tiles, fluorescent lights that hummed like they were tired. We were told it was a backlog job. Scan handwritten intake forms from the early 2000s, type them into a database, flag anything unreadable. No phones, no music. Doors badge locked from the outside only. We sat at long tables facing each other. Clipboards, stacks of paper, identical pens. A supervisor named Harris gave a short briefing, joked about caffeine, then retreated to the glass office at the end of the room. He never came back out. For the first hour, it was boring in the way only paperwork can be. Pens scratching, chairs shifting, someone coughing. I remember noticing how similar everyone's handwriting looked once you typed it out. Names and complaints reduced to the same font, the same blue cursor blinking patiently. At 10:17, the woman across from me stopped writing. Not dramatically, her pen just hovered above the page. I thought she was thinking, maybe squinting at a bad scan. Then the guy to my left did the same. Then another, further down the table. One by one, pens paused mid-stroke. The room went quiet except for the lights. I kept typing. The silence felt staged, like a prank I wasn't in on. I asked if anyone else was getting tired. Nobody answered. They weren't looking at me. They were looking at their forms with an intensity that didn't match the stillness of their hands. Harris was visible through the glass, seated at his desk facing away. His monitor glowed white. At 10:19, I realized everyone had stopped breathing normally. Not stopped breathing, just holding it. Long, careful pauses between shallow inhales, like they were waiting for something to finish. I stood up. The chair legs sounded too loud. Heads turned toward me in unison, eyes wide, irritated. Not angry, corrective. "Sit down," someone whispered. I don't know who. I looked at their forms. The handwriting was gone. The pages were blank, except for faint pressure marks where words used to be. My screen refreshed by itself, every field filled at once with the same sentence, repeated line after line. Do not continue after the last entry. The cursor stopped blinking. At 10:20, pens began moving again, all of them writing the same thing. The sound came back all at once, pens scratching too fast, paper sliding. Breathing, loud and uneven, like people surfacing from underwater. Everyone wrote with urgency, shoulders tight, wrists stiff, as if they were copying something that was about to disappear. I sat down slowly and looked at my own hands. They were shaking, but they still worked. My screen no longer showed the database. It was a plain text document, white background, black letters. A numbered list was already there. Entry 1472. Subject failed to maintain output after observation. Below it, a blinking line waited. I didn't type. I watched. Across the table, the woman who'd stopped first was crying silently while she wrote. Tears fell onto the page, smearing ink, but she didn't slow down. The man to my left mouthed words as he copied them, lips moving slightly out of sync with his pen. I stood again. This time, no one told me to sit. I walked toward Harris's office. Each step felt wrong, like I was interrupting something fragile. Through the glass, I saw his screen clearly now. It wasn't white. It was filled with names. Our names. Each followed by a timestamp and a short status line. Most read, active, producing. 3 near the top read, incomplete. One of those had my name. I knocked on the glass. Harris didn't react. I opened the door. He was slumped in his chair, eyes open, dry. His pen lay on the desk, snapped cleanly in half. On his wrist was a county badge I hadn't noticed before, marked Oversight, Temporary. Behind him, the printer whirred to life. Page after page slid out onto the floor. Not forms, not text, just solid black ink, still wet, stacking and curling as they fell. The room filled with the smell of toner and something metallic underneath. From behind me, chairs scraped back. I turned. Everyone had stood up. They weren't holding papers anymore. Their hands were empty, fingers cramped as if still gripping pens that weren't there. They faced me, not Harris, not the printer. "You're behind," the woman said. Her voice sounded practiced, like reading a line she'd read many times. "I don't know what this is," I said. Saying it out loud felt dangerous. The lights flickered. The printer jammed with a sharp crack. Somewhere in the building, an alarm chirped once, then stopped. "You observed instead of recording," the man to my left said. "That creates gaps." "What happens if there's a gap?" I asked. No one answered. They stepped closer together, closing the space between them, forming a loose line that blocked the exits. Their breathing synced again, shallow and careful. My screen chimed. A new line appeared on its own. Entry 1473, subject aware of process. Below it, the cursor blinked faster than before. At 10:29, the pens reappeared on the tables. None of them reached for one. The silence stretched until my ears rang. No one moved. The pens lay exactly where they'd been before, aligned with the paper edges, tips pointed inward like they'd been placed for a photo. My screen kept blinking. I backed toward my chair. The woman's eyes followed me, not my face, but my hands. When I sat, the chair creaked and several people flinched, as if sound itself was a violation. I picked up the pen. It felt warm. The moment the tip touched paper, the room exhaled. Shoulders dropped. Someone laughed softly, too loud, then clamped a hand over their mouth. The light steadied. The alarm didn't come back. Words came out of my hand without planning. Not fast, not slow, correct. The same blocky handwriting as the others, even though I knew my own didn't look like that. I wrote what the page required, line after line, documenting a process I was now part of, but still didn't understand. Across the table, names appeared on blank pages again, pressing up from nothing. Ink bled into grooves left by previous writing, as if the paper remembered better than we did. My screen updated. Status active, producing. The printer in Harris's office stopped. The smell faded. The black pages were gone when I looked again, replaced by neat stacks of standard forms, drying innocently in the tray. At 11 o'clock, Harris stood up, stretched, and walked back into the room like he'd only stepped out for coffee. He clapped once, smiled, said we were ahead of schedule. No one mentioned the gap. When we were dismissed, we filed out in order. Badges returned, doors unlocked. Outside, the parking lot looked wrong for a second. Too wide, too empty, then settled into normal. I sat in my car with the engine off and watched the building. Through the tinted windows, I could still see the glow of screens, the synchronized movement of hands. My phone buzzed, an email notification from an address I didn't recognize. No subject line, just a single sentence in the body. "Thank you for resuming output. Please do not stop again." At home, my hands kept moving long after there was nothing left to write. This happened at a professional networking mixer in Ohio, one of those rented hotel ballrooms with beige walls and folding chairs stacked behind curtains. Name tags, lukewarm coffee, quiet music from ceiling speakers. About 50 people total. I didn't know anyone there, which was normal. At first, I thought people were just shy. Whenever I stepped toward a small group, the spacing shifted. Someone would drift half a step away. Another would turn sideways, creating a gap that wasn't there before. Not obvious enough to call out, just enough to notice if you were watching. I brushed it off. Crowds do that. I joined a circle near the bar. 4 people. As I arrived, conversation slowed. A woman glanced down at my badge, then at the floor behind me. She took 2 steps left, putting a cocktail table between us. The man next to her followed without looking at me. Suddenly, I was standing at the edge of my own group. No one said anything. I moved again. Same result. It wasn't just distance either. People angled their bodies away, shoulders turned, feet pointed elsewhere. A guy laughed at a joke, then stopped when I got close, like the sound had been cut. I checked myself. Clothes, fine. No smell. Breath, fine. I even went to the restroom and washed my hands, like that could help anything. Back in the room, I noticed something worse. People were watching me when they thought I wasn't looking. Not my face, my position, the space around me. A man near the back whispered something to the woman beside him and nodded in my direction. She stiffened and took a step back, bumping into another person who apologized without knowing why. I finally spoke to someone directly, a middle-aged guy with a vendor badge. "Hey, is there some rule I missed about where to stand?" He stared at me for a second too long. His eyes flicked past my shoulder. "You should probably stay near the wall," he said. "Why?" He swallowed. "They'll get upset if you don't." "Who?" He didn't answer. He just walked away, fast, leaving his drink on the table.
I stayed where I was. That's when people started leaving early. Chairs scraped, conversations ended mid-sentence, the exits filled. No panic, no rush, just coordinated avoidance, like everyone had silently agreed that the room wasn't safe anymore. Within minutes, there was a wide, clean circle around me. Empty carpet, no one inside it. Even the staff kept their distance. One of them finally looked straight at me, eyes wide with something close to relief, and said, very quietly, "Oh, you can see it too now." I didn't know what she meant. Then I noticed the temperature drop in the space where no one would stand, and the way the carpet fibers leaned inward. The circle didn't shrink when people left. It stayed precise, like it had edges. I stepped forward, testing it, and the woman at the check-in table flinched hard enough to knock over a clipboard. "Please," she said, then stopped herself.
The room was quieter now. Just the low hum of lights and the faint music still playing for no one. I looked down at the carpet again. The fibers weren't crushed where people had walked all night. Inside the circle, they were pressed flat, darker, like something heavy had been there for a long time. I moved my foot. The pressure shifted with me. That's when I realized the empty space wasn't centered on my body. It was offset, slightly behind me, following like a shadow that didn't match the light. I turned slowly. Nothing was there, just air. But the feeling changed, like standing too close to a speaker before feedback starts. My ears rang. The back of my neck tightened. Across the room, the vendor guy was still there, halfway out the door. He saw me turn and shook his head, small and desperate. "Don't," he mouthed. I ignored him. I leaned back just a little. The temperature dropped again. Not the whole room, just that space. My breath fogged behind me, thin and fast. Someone near the exit made a choking sound and covered their mouth. I asked the room, "What is this?" No one answered. No one moved closer. The staff member who'd spoken before finally did again. She didn't raise her voice. "It lines up with people sometimes," she said. "Most don't notice. You noticed." "Notice what?" She hesitated, then said, "The absence." I felt pressure against my back, firm but not painful, like leaning into a door that hadn't opened yet. My heartbeat sped up, but not from fear, more like my body was reacting before my head could catch up. I stepped forward to get away from it. The pressure followed. Someone near the door whispered, "It's attached." I turned again, faster this time. Still nothing, but the air behind me rippled, subtle, like heat off asphalt. My ears popped. The woman at the check-in table started crying. Not loudly, just tears, hands shaking. "You brought it inside," she said. "They always say not to bring it inside." "I didn't bring anything," I said, louder now. "I came alone." "No," the vendor guy said. "You came aligned." The word didn't feel right in the room. The lights flickered once, then steadied. I took another step. The circle tightened. The circle tightening wasn't fast. It was careful. People backed up in small, synchronized steps, like they were giving something space to breathe. Chairs scraped again as if on cue. Someone dropped their badge and didn't go back for it. I felt the pressure grow heavier, no longer just behind me. It wrapped partway around my ribs, uneven, like hands placed wrong. My balance shifted without me moving. "Stop adjusting," someone said sharply from near the exit. "You're making it notice the room." I asked, "Notice what it's doing to me?" No one answered that. The staff member wiped her face and looked at the floor. "It's not doing anything yet," she said. "You're still useful where you are." That word hit harder than the pressure. I tried to step sideways. The force corrected me, firm, practiced, pushing me back into alignment. My shoes squeaked against the carpet. The sound made several people wince. The vendor guy spoke again, voice shaking. "They tell us not to acknowledge it. If you don't give it contrast, it doesn't settle." "Settle where?" I asked. He shut his eyes. "On someone." The lights dimmed slightly. Not a power issue, more like the room deciding to stop emphasizing details. Faces blurred at the edges. The music cut out mid-note. I felt the space behind me deepen, like a drop-off that didn't exist on the floor plan. Breathing took effort, as if the air had weight. "You need to leave," the staff member said. "Slowly, straight. Don't turn. Don't break the shape." "Why me?" I asked. This time, someone answered. "Because you don't resist the spacing," a woman near the door said. "You keep trying to stand normally."
That didn't make sense until I realized everyone else was leaning, subtly, away from invisible pressure points in the room. They weren't standing where they wanted. They were standing where they were allowed. I walked toward the exit. Each step felt approved, guided. The pressure stayed tight, almost supportive, like it was making sure I didn't trip. At the doorway, it stopped. The space released all at once. My knees buckled, and I caught myself on the doorframe. Warm air rushed in from the hallway. Behind me, the circle collapsed instantly. People filled the room like water returning to a shape. Voices came back. Someone laughed too loud. The staff member closed the door gently. Through the glass, she mouthed something I couldn't hear. Outside, in the empty hallway, my phone buzzed. A calendar alert I didn't set. Alignment review, recurring. I checked my reflection in the dark glass. The space behind me was still wrong, and people passing in the hall were already starting to give me room.
A non-post. They hired through a temp agency that mostly does cleanup after construction delays. The email said, 1-day assignment, hazard pay, paperwork on site. No company name, just an address outside Toledo, an industrial park squeezed between a rail spur and a drainage canal. I figured it was another overnight mess someone didn't want photographed. The site was a low concrete building with no signage, lights on inside, parking lot empty except for a white utility van. A man in a reflective vest checked my ID against a printed list, didn't say my name, just nodded, and handed me a badge with a number. He said, "This will be quick if you follow directions." Inside smelled like dust and disinfectant, no machinery running. 3 other workers waited near a folding table. Nobody talked much. We signed forms that were mostly blanks, with initials required at the bottom. One line said, task duration not to exceed 15 minutes. That sounded fine. The supervisor walked us down a corridor to a room that looked like an unfinished lab. Concrete floor, drains cut into it, fluorescent lights humming. In the center was a steel frame bolted down, something like a pallet rack laid flat. No blood, no mess, just dark scuff marks where something heavy had been dragged. The instructions were simple. Move the frame to the marked square, secure it with straps, remove the covering when told. He kept saying, don't rush and don't improvise. Someone asked what had been on it before. He said, equipment, and looked annoyed. We got to work. The frame was heavier than expected, like the weight wasn't evenly distributed. It resisted in small ways, catching on the floor even when nothing was there. The straps didn't line up with the bolts, even though they were supposed to be standard. The supervisor checked his watch and told us we were already behind. When he said to remove the covering, it wasn't a tarp like I assumed. It was a thick rubber sheet taped down at the edges. As we peeled it back, the smell changed. Not rot, not chemicals. Something warm that didn't belong in a cold room. Under the sheet was the impression of something, pressed deep into the rubber, as if it had been resting there a long time. No object, just the shape left behind. Human-sized, but wrong in proportion, shoulders too narrow, length too long. One of the other workers laughed once, sharp and nervous, and then stopped. The supervisor stepped back and said, "Okay, that's enough." He told us to recover it. His voice wasn't steady anymore. As we pulled the sheet back, the rubber resisted like suction. The lights flickered, just once. From the hallway came a sound like metal tapping concrete, slow and careful, getting closer. The supervisor said, very quietly, "I said this would be quick," and locked the door from the inside. That's where this part ends. The lock clicked loud in the small room. Nobody asked why. The tapping outside stopped, replaced by a slow scrape along the wall, like someone feeling for the handle without touching it. The supervisor told us to stay quiet and keep the sheet down. He crouched by the door and pressed his ear to it. His radio crackled once, then went dead. He cursed under his breath and checked his watch again, like the time mattered. The sound came back, closer now. Not footsteps, something sliding and lifting, uneven, with pauses that felt deliberate. The drains in the floor started to gurgle, even though nothing was running. The lights dimmed just enough to notice. One of the workers whispered that this wasn't in the paperwork. The supervisor snapped at him to shut up and help hold the straps. He said the frame had to stay secured, that whatever happened, it couldn't be allowed to settle again. The rubber sheet began to sink.
Not fast, just a gradual depression forming in the middle, as if weight was being reapplied from above. The straps tightened on their own, creaking against the metal. I could see the outline returning, sharper than before, like the surface was remembering. The tapping stopped right outside the door. A voice came through, calm and conversational, asking if the task was finished yet. It didn't sound angry, it sounded patient. The supervisor answered without thinking, said we were almost done. The voice thanked him for being efficient. The handle turned, once, twice. The lock held. The shape under the sheet shifted. The proportions changed, length shortening, shoulders widening, becoming closer to human. Too close. One strap snapped and whipped across the floor, cutting into a boot. Nobody yelled. The supervisor told us to brace the frame, to lean our weight into it. He said if it stood up before the timer ended, it would be worse. I asked him what the timer was for. He didn't answer. The voice outside started counting. Slow, clear, like it had done this before. At 10, the lights went out completely. In the dark, something pressed back against us from under the sheet, testing resistance, learning where hands and legs were. The door rattled once, hard enough to shake dust from the ceiling. Then everything went still. The supervisor checked his watch again. Its screen glowed faintly. He smiled, relieved, and said, "Okay, time's up." The voice outside stopped counting. The lock disengaged on its own. That's where I'll stop for now. The door opened inward without a sound. Nothing stood in the doorway. The hallway lights were on again, steady and bright, like nothing had happened. The supervisor straightened his vest and told us not to move until he confirmed the site was clear. He stepped out, glanced left and right, then waved us forward. The rubber sheet had gone flat. No impression, no warmth, just scuffed marks and torn tape. One of the straps lay snapped on the floor, metal end bent like it had been twisted by hand. The supervisor said we were done. He avoided looking at the frame. He avoided looking at us. He unlocked a side door and told us to exit that way. Single file, no talking. The sound in the building felt wrong without the hum of tension, like a pressure drop. In the hallway, we passed another room with a window. Inside were identical frames stacked vertically, each covered, each labeled with dates instead of numbers. Some were recent, some went back years. I asked what this place was. The supervisor said it didn't matter anymore and that the payment would process automatically. He said not to come back if the agency called again. Outside, the parking lot was full now. Vans I hadn't seen before, workers I didn't recognize, unloading fresh sheets and crates of straps. Nobody met our eyes. As I walked to my car, I noticed something on my badge. The number had been scratched out and replaced with a different one, etched deep, like it had been done with a nail. I didn't remember anyone touching it. I drove home on autopilot, tried to tell myself it was stress, adrenaline, bad lighting. That night, while showering, I felt soreness along my arms and ribs, like I'd been leaning into something heavy for a long time. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a survey from the temp agency. One question stood out. Did the task remain contained for the full duration? I didn't answer. Later that week, I caught my reflection in a store window and paused. For a split second, my shoulders looked narrower. My posture felt wrong, like I was standing the way something else preferred. I threw the badge away, snapped it in half. The number was still visible in the plastic. Yesterday, I got another email. Same wording, different address. It said the task would be quick. It thanked me for my reliability. This time, the duration line was blank. No more parts. The last story is finished, but the silence after it isn't. You've been with Lermo Stories, and now it's just you and the dark, replaying every little detail you wish you could unhear.